See you all again. This story is great. Every now and then you meet someone who is just so magnificently honest and open and intimate that the story resonates deeply with you. And I have to say, this is one of those stories with me. I spoke to Kirsty Nancarrow. She's a successful journalist. She's an author. She's a humanitarian from Nepal, and she opened up on her success and struggles. So if you want to hear about a seriously successful journalist, if you want to hear from a writer, if you want to hear from someone who's actually achieved in the humanitarian sphere, how she got to the top of her game, what knocked her to the bottom and how she got up again, and of course you want to hear something like that, this is the interview for you. And I really suggest you stay right to the end, and obviously make sure you like, comment and share. Now, I knew of Kirsty's work for the Australian Broadcasting Commission in Cairns when I worked in the police. She was a great journo, and I'll tell you straight up and down, she pulled no punches. She was greatly respected by the police and also by her colleagues. She covered the Murray Street killings. For those unaware of that tragic incident, in 2014 in Murray Street, Manura, which is a suburb of Cairns, 8 children were killed by a lady. 7 of them were her own children, and 1 of them was her niece. That unfortunate lady, and of course the children suffered more, but that unfortunate lady suffered from severe mental illness. Now that tragedy still impacts on the community to this day. Now, not long after attending that, Kirsty was the first journalist on scene to the Ravenshoe explosion. For the few of people who don't know about that, that's where an out-of-control 4-wheel drive hit and punctured a 450-kilogram gas cylinder outside of a cafe on the main street of Ravenshoe. Needless to say, it caused a massive explosion and fire. The accident actually occurred at lunchtime. 20 people were injured, including some fire officers, many critically. 2 women later died from the injuries. I can say, as a veteran former police officer, that she has seen more than her fair share of carnage. She really was magnificently intimate in this interview. She's an incredibly accomplished woman. She held nothing back. We spoke about her stellar career, her work in Nepal, her breakdown, the craft of journalism, weaving facts into a narrative, and more. Look, I commend this interview to you and encourage you to watch all of it. Northern Vibe doesn't make any profit and really needs your help. So please like, please share, please comment. But enough from me. Let's get straight into this magnificent interview. Kirsty, thank you so much for taking time out of your phenomenally busy schedule to come on Northern Vibe.
My pleasure, Matt. Good to be with you.
Well, actually, I suspect the pleasure, quite frankly, will be that of the listeners. But to dive right in, you're a very accomplished person. So right now you're running a successful media consultancy. You were a very successful journalist in the ABC. You've written books. You've traveled. You've been to some really cool places. Can we kind of dive straight in to your career?
Absolutely.
Media consultant.
Going back to my childhood, I think most people were probably concentrating on making friends and playing when they were 9 years old. But for me, I knew that was when I knew I wanted to be a journalist. So I don't remember exactly how it went, but my grandfather, who was my inspiration and still is for my writing and my journalism, and he was my last surviving grandfather when I was 10. So didn't really have those kind of role models around very much, but we had a real connection around writing. We used to write letters and poetry to each other. And he said to me when I was 9 that I reminded him of Jan Event, who your older viewers might remember was a big deal back then, and current affairs anchor and 60 Minutes. And that kind of sparked this interest on my part of becoming a journalist. And I kind of didn't get off that track after that. It was all I really wanted to do. I thought, yeah, I can tell people stories and I can investigate and I can shine a light on things. And that was really what started things off. So everything I did after that was geared towards a career in journalism.
It's really funny you should say, because gone are the days, tragically, and like yes, it's true that I am a Luddite, but this is not just a Luddite talking. Look, email is a fantastic means of communication, and all these new apps and whatnot. I mean, they're fast, they're efficient, they're everything else. But there really is something about sitting down and writing, or in my case, because I have handwriting like a doctor, typing. Yeah, right there. I find that reassuring. But writing those intimate letters, going back to the point, and I assure you there actually was a point to this, was that when you're being really intimate and you're writing intimate letters to friends and stuff like that, like, you know, articulating those thoughts, and that's where the authenticity and communication comes from. I genuinely think that doing something as simple as that is fantastic training in journalism and writing.
That's right. And to give you another example, years and years later, and I'm sure we'll cover this, I found myself overseas while my partner, then to become husband, was back in Alice Springs. And we actually communicated over the modern letter writing, which is email. We didn't have so much of the instant video sharing and all of that. I mean, he was a musician in a pub in Alice Springs, and they had a little webcam. So occasionally he'd get up after a gig and wave at the camera, but I certainly couldn't hear him. So we actually did revert to writing letters to each other and writing emails. And it actually really set the scene for the dynamic of our relationship, because it was like almost like a traditional courtship of yesteryear, where it was in the printed word and it was lasting forever. And I have those communications now, and it's a very treasured thing. Whereas in the modern day, we say things and it's there and it's gone again. So I kind of like that traditional writing on a piece of paper and sending it, and knowing someone's not going to receive it for a little while, and the anticipation of all of that, and also receiving that kind of communication. Unfortunately, letters I get these days are bills, or, you know, pictures from politicians around election time.
Oh, yeah.
I love a handwritten letter.
Everybody does. And look, I do want to lead into the inspiration, you know, because you've told us what inspired you and what you would suggest to up-and-coming writing and journalists. But before we jump into that, I'm really keen on hearing about your love affair with Nepal and your book Himalayan Dreams.
So they always say that everyone's got a book in them, and I guess it was at the back of my mind that was the case. But as a journalist, you're used to instant gratification, and the idea of a written project that wasn't going to be realized anytime soon was something that I really had to wrap my head around, because I love ticking off lists. I love seeing the work that I've done at the end of the day. And one of the things that I loved about being a journalist, a news journalist, was the day finishes and it's all done, and the next day is a new day with new stories, and you make a fresh start. With a book, it carries on, and it's a long process, from the research to the interviewing of the talent to getting the photos together. There's so many considerations. Now, not to mention actually trying to get it published. So Himalayan Dreams is still yet to be published. The manuscript has been finished for some time, but I have still been on a campaign to have it picked up by a traditional publisher, and now starting to consider other options, because I think the story really needs to be out there. Now, the love affair with Nepal, kind of the spark for that was started when I was actually in London. I mentioned before that I was working in London. I decided to take a bit of a break from the ABC. I'd been working in the newsroom in Alice Springs, and then I went to Sydney and was working for ABC News and Current Affairs there. But I had itchy feet, so I thought I'm just going to do I didn't think initially wasn't attracted to follow the Aussie trail over to England, but there I was. I found myself over there. I had a cousin and a really good friend who were over there, so I thought this is a good time. And I really struggled because I was at the top of my career, as I considered then, working for AMP and the World Today, and I went over to the UK and I was nobody to no one.
Yeah.
And the fact that I had an Australian accent kind of disqualified me, if you like, from working in broadcast. And so it was very humbling. And I ended up getting my first job over there was as a temp in a beauty salon. And then soon after that, I actually got a job in an Indian restaurant called Varma, which is on the King's Road in Chelsea. It's a very kind of swish part of town. And this restaurant was frequented by lots of celebrities, Bryan Adams and Jerry Hall, and famous authors and actors. And I was the maitre d' there. I did end up getting a PR job with the Nursing and Midwifery Council after that, but I actually held on to that job in the Indian restaurant for the whole time because it was like a family to me. And I met my first Nepalese friends there, and we are still in touch today. And that is 20 something years ago now that we formed that connection. So I still have a friend who is in London from Nepal, and her brother is actually in Kathmandu, and I have stayed with his family the twice that I've been over there. So that's kind of where I started. I just found the Nepalese people really generous and warm and funny and friendly. But then, of course, I had full immersion after meeting Som Tamang, who lives in Cairns and runs Friends of Himalayan Children and Take on Nepal. And I came across Som a couple of days after the 2015 earthquake, which happened on Anzac Day.
Yeah.
And he invited me around to his home to speak to him about the tragedy. He unfortunately lost his brother, and also the hostel that the Friends of Himalayan Children had built to ensure children in his village, Batassi, could go to school and have a roof over their head and 3 meals a day. So I became intrigued about the work that he was doing after hearing and doing stories about the initial response, because he said the effort would be focused on all the tourist areas and in Kathmandu and not in the remote regions. And he was concerned people would have the secondary trauma of essentially starving and not having shelter afterwards. So he mounted a campaign to get resources to go back, started taking people from Cairns over there. So became more and more interested in what was happening over there, and more inclined to go and visit myself. And having covered lots of natural disasters in far north Queensland and Central Australia, I know that support is very intense after the initial disaster, but tends to wane afterwards. And that leaves a bit of a hole for the people who are trying to recover. So I kind of got it into my head that I would like to go over and help, but knew that that wouldn't be in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake. So it wasn't until the late in 2016 that I decided that I would put my hand up as a volunteer to go over there. And I remember having the discussion with Som at the time and said, oh, look, I'm happy to do anything. I can build, maybe. I can cook. I can clean, whatever needs to happen to help. And he's like, no. I want you to teach journalism in the school. And that was something that hadn't happened before in Batassi's school. It's high up in overlooking the Langtang Range, which is part of the Himalayas. And it is a 2-day walk for someone like me from Kathmandu, which is how I got there. And at that stage, the school hadn't been rebuilt, so it was still a tin shed on a dirt floor.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was teaching English through the vehicle of journalism to the school for about a month, but also everything else. I was the science teacher, I was an art teacher, I even taught salsa dancing. I remember my first day turning up at the school, and we'd just come off. They have a lot of festivals over there. So I arrived in Batassi in the middle of the Tira Festival, and it was several days long, and a lot of the children had gone back to their families for the break. Some of the children in the hostel still have a surviving parent, or they do have both parents, but they can't afford to keep all of the children, so some are at the hostel. And so the first few days I was there, it was holiday time and feasting, and then I had this rude awakening of going to the school for the first time, and I was expecting to just shadow somebody for the first day to get my bearings. But a lot of the teachers had also stayed away for an extended break. So here I was rocking up at the school and being given, by the fourth class of the day, they decided to round up all the remaining kids from 5-year-olds to 16, 17-year-olds and put them all in a room and say, here you go, Kirsty. Teach them. And so I thought, what can I do that's going to cross over from that age group? And I am a salsa dance teacher, so I took them all outside and we did a salsa lesson for the last lesson. So there you go. So, and I did fall in love with Nepal. When I went over there, I was taking a break from the ABC. I was very depressed and in probably the lowest point of my life, and I really lost all feeling of worth, all the joy in my life, and I was pretty desperate at that point. And
Wow.
yeah, so
I mean, crikey, that's considering that you were really kicking backside, really kicking backside. Like, I mean, are you happy to dive into that, or what?
absolutely. Yeah. Look, something that isn't talked about a lot, and I know that you're very familiar with the space, and you've had other guests talking about depression and PTSD. We tend to associate it with first responders, you know, police, fire, ambulance officers. No one really thinks about journalists, unless as first responders or witnesses. And we get exposed to a lot of vicarious trauma where we're in very intimate situations with victims of crime, victims of disasters. I sat in so many murder trials and horrific court cases that, you know, with very graphic details and room full of emotion, and you can feel it from people. You're absorbing it all from the families sitting around you, and you're in all of this time you're having to remain impartial and you know, just reporting the facts. So I thought that the court cases I covered in Alice Springs were horrific, and they were. And then I came to Far North Queensland, and there was all these, you know, bizarre, horrific murders that I was covering. It really was two things. First thing was the Murray Street deaths of the children, which happened right before Christmas in 2014. And I remember we did the police rounds 3 times a day, and I remember ringing my contact at the police, the shift sergeant, right before the bulletin, and yeah, he was not his usual self, and he was describing that they were at an incident in Cairns and there were multiple fatalities and that they were all children. And I freaked out, and I thought, oh, there must have been a bus crash. And he said, no, it's a stabbing. And it was horrific. And we all just jumped into work mode. I mean, it was right before Christmas, so there were staff already on leave or going on leave, and we just all geared up to respond to this story. And it just kind of, the coverage kept going, and then I continued with that in the days to come as we approached Christmas. And it was just, yeah, it was horrible for everybody, for the whole cancer community, but certainly as journalists, it was really horrible to have to cover. And then about 6 months later was the Ravenshoe cafe explosion.
Yeah.
So we were trained as video journalists at the ABC by the end of my time there. So we were not only doing reporting for radio, but also television, online, social media, and also filming our own content and stories. So I was up in Atherton doing a story on, I think the part of the geode at the Crystal Caves had been stolen.
Yeah.
And I was doing a story on that, and I got a call pretty close to midday saying, we need to redeploy you. Something's happened at Ravenshoe. And obviously I wasn't very far away. I was only sort of 20, 30 minutes away. So I headed straight there and was the first camera person on scene. And of course I arrive and it's raining, it's in winter, and it was
Chaos.
it
Absolutely.
was chaos. It was just a sea of ambulances and white sheets and people running around trying to help. And it was really my worst day on the job ever. I felt so conflicted. My natural instinct was to help. And then I just had this pressure to report and to news gather. And of course, the requests for live crosses were coming in already. So it's sort of dividing your time between trying to get a handle on what's happening and film and interview and do live crosses and try and be respectful of what's happening, knowing that and it just completely went against my gut to be doing that. So I tried to, as respectfully as I could, not to interfere and get in the way, but with a job to do as well. So it was really those two things that were the icing on the cake of possibly overexposure to trauma over the years. And I just started noticing signs, from about then that I was a bit different, and it kind of went on and on and on. And I had an opportunity to go for the chief of staff role and get out of the newsroom at the ABC, and I got that role, and I thought, good, I'll have a bit of a break and do what I love, which is mentoring others and dealing with stakeholders and all that. And I think it was probably too little too late, and I got to the point where I'd just come in. I remember one day, and I couldn't even mentally process how to turn my computer on. It got to that point where I was just like a stunned mullet, and went on antidepressants, and then was advised to take a significant amount of leave. And by then I was suicidal. I didn't want to be here. I had spent a lot of time reporting on suicides and could never really understand the process of people wanting to end their lives, and perhaps thought about it as a selfish act. But it's not until you're there yourself that you realize that, yeah, I get it. You get to a point where you just think that's the best option and everyone will be better off, which is a horrible thing to say because I now know that's not the case. But yeah, I was really in the weeds. So I had to just stop everything and do nothing. I'm a very social person, so all of that got switched off. I didn't want to be around people. I didn't want to leave the house. And I just really had to kind of go back down to ground. And I remember thinking at the time, I didn't know if I was going to come back from it. I just thought, if I'm employable in the future, the best thing I could think of doing was putting those little stickers on fruit. I thought I could do that. And that was my kind of career goal after that. But then I talked to Som and his partner Susan about going to Nepal, and they said, we think this would be really good for you. And so a few months after I took my leave, I felt strong enough I'd had sleep. The other thing was I hadn't slept for 5 months, which was really a precursor to all of that kind of zombie mode happening. And just waking up with panic attacks about the next day, what's going to happen. And often my fears were founded. It was just this weird year of, maybe I was more attuned to it, but there just seemed to be a lot of death and destruction in that period. So yeah, fast forward, and I decided to go and volunteer in Nepal, and Som wasn't going to be there. I wasn't going with anybody else. I literally just went by myself and spent a month in Batasi. And that process of getting up every day with the kids, walking to school with them, doing the best I could with the teaching, helping them with the homework afterwards, going to bed when the sun went down, and just having that really simple, honest life, and contributing and taking everything away from it being about me. I think in our society, we're very focused on ourselves, and over there, it's just very much a community making life happen, and they're so happy. And I just got some self-worth back and came home, and I just thought, I have to write some story. People need to know about the change that he's making in this community and the benefit. I've always believed in the benefit of education. I worked for the Institute for Aboriginal Development in Alice Springs for a while, and I always believed in the power of education. And here I was seeing it and being part of it and the change that it can make. So SOM's organisation is very much about protecting particularly girls in the village from child trafficking and early marriage. You know, in the villages there, it's quite common, or it has been, for people to be married off quite young, possibly even, you know, pre-teen in the past, and also for traffickers to tell kids a story and tell the parents a story about how they can, you know, give their child a better life and come with me to Kathmandu, and all of a sudden they're shipped into the sex trade in India, never to return, except perhaps to die if they've contracted a disease and they're no longer a viable commodity. So yeah, that's my love affair with Nepal and how I came to write the book. It took a few years after having that initial thought in 2016 before I was in a position to do the project. It takes a lot of time and resources, so it wasn't until I secured a regional art development grant from the Cairns Regional Council and Queensland Government in 2020 before I went, all right, I can do this. I had been back in 2018 and actually done a fundraising trek for the first library for the village. And during that time, I did interview people, SOM's family, young men and women who'd benefited from the support of Friends of Himalayan Children, with the idea that these would be for the book. And then in 2020, I was able to start actually pulling it all together.
Wow, what an incredible story. Isn't it strange, though, how there is this relationship between being exposed to suffering and it, in some ways, being positive and coming out with a positive thing, and that's so anti-instinctual. And like you said too before, the other thing that I think the West used to have right, but I'd say since the 1960s we've kind of got wrong, is the relationship between the individual and the collective. We've always, as a society, focused on individualism, and that's not a bad thing, unless you just go, look, the only thing that matters is the individual. If you conceptualize an individual in relationship with a collective, which I suppose the best way of articulating this would be, if you think of yourself as a node in a network, you're maintaining your individuality, which is so important, and still maintaining that hierarchy of the individual is the point of having a collective, but you're still maintaining the relationship, positive, God willing, relationship with the collective. And I think that that's something we've lost in the West. It's strange. Yeah, it's something we've lost in the West. I mean, what we do is, we look to places like Nepal and stuff like that. It's actually in our own tradition, but that's that's a discussion in and of itself. But kudos to you. Look, there's so much going on in my head right now. I want to thank you for being so candid. That is, and I want to make the observation that that's genuinely an inspirational story, and and saying, I kind of like, I got a degree of empathy with where you're coming from without going into precise details. Like, trust me, when I say kind of the whole no sleep and the, I get it.
Yeah, so I was subsequently diagnosed with, I did go back to the ABC for a period, and then I realized it just wasn't good for me. I'd healed to a certain extent, but being in that environment was no longer good for me. So, and I was subsequently diagnosed with PTSD. So I can happily report that I received very effective treatment, and it took a long time, but I feel like I'm the best version of myself I have ever been now. And I really don't mind sharing, because I think a lot of people feel like there's no way out, and it can feel like that at the time, but if you just hang in there, and it's hard, it's a really hard thing to do, but if you just hang in there and draw on the support that's around you, because it'll be there, you'll make it through. And I couldn't have done this without my husband, my beautiful stepson, my mum, my beautiful friends. And when I started sharing a little bit on my social media about what I was going through, or at least posting things that were putting up the red flags, the amount of people that reached out to me with support, but also to say, oh, I had no idea I'm actually going through this as well, or I have been, was phenomenal, and quite scary, really, that we don't, back to your comment about community and individualism, we don't take enough time to be aware of what's going on for the people around us. And sometimes we miss opportunities to offer a show of care that might be the difference. So if you want to take something home, please keep reaching out to those around you, and sometimes even strangers. I don't mind. Sometimes if I see somebody in need in the street, I will just go and help, because the small difference that you make there might be life-changing for them, and might have averted them from a decision they were going to make that had drastic consequences, or it might mean that they get to eat tonight, or that they take some action to protect themselves that they weren't going to, whatever it might be. Sometimes a tiny little act of kindness and getting yourself out of your comfort zone can make a huge difference to people. So it's kind of been a thread through my whole life. I really have had a social conscience, and not in terms of activism, but more just as a human being. It's one of the things that motivated me to become a journalist. I'm really not excited by crime or politics. They're part of what you have to do. But what really floats my boat is telling human stories, and Som Tamang's story for me, and the associated stories with the work that he is doing, really spoke to me in terms of the difference you can make in other people's lives. So I'm excited about human stories, and everyone has the capacity to make a difference. He's just made a really huge difference.
I mean, well, so have you, through what you've done, and vicariously through all the reporting. Obviously, coming back to the Himalayan thing, because that's perhaps the highest resolution and the easiest way you can articulate it. But with a career as long and as, quite frankly, as stellar as what yours was, like I could say that would not be an isolated example. But you made another observation there too. Obviously, the sort of people that go into journalism are empathetic. So you got highly empathetic people getting exposed to this, and people do underestimate trauma. They really do. And it's not so much like, as you know, I spent 30 years in the job, so I know a little bit about this. But it's what can be most painful is, like you said, hearing those human stories. But the blood and guts and stuff like that, that comes with the territory. But when you talk to these genuinely shattered people, everyone's got a use-by date with that too. It's actually important. It's a strength to recognize that you've got a use-by date and you've hit it.
Yeah.
I know so many coppers that have just like, and other emergency, and actually I've got a couple of really good friend nurses and stuff like that too. It's like, yeah, you hit your use by date and you don't know it. You
Yeah,
got
and look, we all hang on to it because it's what it
identity.
becomes who we are
Identity.
and what
Yeah,
we know, and it's our
exactly.
safety blanket. It doesn't matter how much it's damaging us. Like it got to the stage where my husband was making me say every day, "I'm leaving the ABC. I'm leaving the ABC," and I had to recite that mantra, and then I manifest it because I was stubborn, and I was like, "Well, I work so hard to be here, and I've put in 15 years, and like it's everything I know, and everything. I'm so proud of this organization and working for it, and built my reputation and awards and all that kind of stuff that come with that territory. And
Yep.
like, there's so much ego attached to what we do. And what I realize now is that I'm still a journalist. I am still contributing, and I'm just doing it in a different way. I'm really happy because I get to do all the things that I loved about my job as a journalist. I get to mentor people. I still get to tell stories. I get to video, and it's like the best of everything. And but at the time when you're in there trying to grapple with the decision that you want to have to walk away from something that's pretty much all that you've known and you loved and been known for, it can be really, really hard. So I do empathize with people that do stay even though it's not good for them, because I get it. It's really hard to let go. But
Yeah.
having let go, people often ask me, "Oh, do you miss the
Yeah.
ABC?" Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Now I go in there as a guest, which is nice every now and then.
Yeah.
But yes, yeah.
And
And
you get
also,
to maintain that connection, and it's like, hey, Kirsty, and oh, there's my old desk, and hey, Smithy, how's it going? Like, that kind of. No, I believe me, I get it. There's so many coppers, and I know some of them are actually are going to watch this. The people that have done it come sliding up to me and go, especially in non-com. So your experienced senior con, your sergeants come sliding up and go, "What's it like outside?" Like, you got these guys. They're kind of like me. Like they joined when they were like, I joined when I was 19. So, some of them, there was one guy now, there's only one or two guys in the entire intake who are younger than me, but, guys that joined when they're 18, 19, and, girls too, like have just gone right through. It's who they are. It's so strange. Like, these people will literally go running into, the most dangerous situations, like whatever it is. It doesn't bother them. It's like, yeah, no worries, vest up. Okay, I'll go point, I'll do this, whatever it is. But if you say to them, "Oh, mate, maybe think of getting out of the job and not having that in inverted commas comfort zone, because it's kind of dangerous, but it's actually a comfort zone." And they're like, so, it's not as if they lack the physical courage. That's not the issue, but it's like they're so scared of getting out of a comfort zone, which is, I still find that, and I say that all the time. It's not that you're not brave. It's not that you don't have the character. It's not that you haven't got the courage. You've proved you've got plenty of physical character, like courage. No one will ever question that. So, dude, you've got to get out of your comfort zone. You totally have to get out of your comfort zone, because kind of like you're in a weird, dangerous, destructive comfort zone. It's like, how strange is that?
absolutely. And sometimes I don't know about your how you managed to resolve that detaching from the workforce, but for me it was having an opportunity come up to do a job at Queensland Health for the Cairns and Hinterland Hospital and Health Service, and they specifically wanted somebody to help them tell good news stories, and they knew of the video skills that I had, and they said, yeah, this is a missing part of our team. We have been just being reactive to media. In the last few years, it was around the time of the board leaving and the $80 million budget deficit, and they didn't have the capacity to tell the good stuff. They were just fighting the bad stuff every day. So it was a real pleasure being able to go in there and basically be a journalist for the health service. And it actually had two effects. It was not just good for creating community confidence in the health service again, but the staff as well. They, by seeing the good stories come out again and being acknowledged, they also felt like they were seen, and morale actually improved as well, being able to have that more balanced view of, like, rather than going to work or not wanting to say at the supermarket that they worked there. There was, this pride that was being restored by being able to share some of the good stuff that's going on, which was happening all the time. It's just that people weren't hearing about it. They were only hearing the bad stuff. So it's part of the reason why I decided to set up my own media training business, because I thought there was a disconnect between journalists and organisations. And there's, not only a fear of journalists, but also not knowing how to navigate the relationship and not knowing what journalists need. So having been both a journalist and a communications professional, I felt like I could bring both sides to the equation and help create a better relationship, because journalists is just so freaking busy, and it gets worse all the time. The 24-hour news cycle and the technology and all of that, like it just has ramped things up and up and up, and it's always been even more intense in regional areas. So I specialise in actually working with people in regional areas to cultivate that relationship with the media, get their stories out there, and give journalists what they need. Because a lot of the time there's people just, they don't know what they don't know. So they put all this work into a media release and they get disappointed when nothing happens. And I'm like, well, just to put it into context, I got about 200 emails a day when I was at the ABC, and on top of putting together, several bulletins in the morning, sub-editing the work of regional journalists across all of Queensland, and keeping across breaking news of the day, which happened very often. We were in the state and federal and national bulletins, so you got to keep all those balls in the air. If you think about that context and your little lonely email that just says media release, you're probably going to get lost. So yeah, I just help people navigate how to give themselves the best chance of getting their story in the media.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's so important, and the morale thing is so important too. Like I totally get that, and I remember talking to some of my friends in health when that and the pay scandal thing was going on. Like it smashes their morale, and same in the coppers, because like I was still in the job when with the George Floyd killing, and people were like snarling at us, yeah, you murderers. A guy on the other side of the world kneels on someone's neck, and somehow that reflects on me. Like, really? So it wasn't just the complete and utter stupidity and bigotry that it was bringing out. It does affect you. Like, as much as you sit there and go, yeah, whatever it is, I'll let that wash over. Who are you going to call when the chips are down, mate? It's going to be a social worker. It's going to be me. But it does. It kind of like, it affects you. You can't, as you know, you can't distance yourself from that all the time, especially when your identity is linked up with these things. But can you tell me, because we've been talking a lot about journalism, and it's a really important job, and I know a lot of journalists, and I have a lot of respect for the profession when it's done right. Would you recommend it now as a job to people? Because I mean, you went through some tough times and it affected you personally. It's obviously something you still have a deep relationship with the concept of telling stories, your natural curiosity, your natural empathy. Clearly, you're a highly articulate person. So would you still recommend it as a career for people?
I would, because you get to have access and insight into people and events and situations that the ordinary person doesn't, and like that's really exciting to be part of, be a witness and a teller of things that becomes history and all of that. Like, it's a really privileged job. and those things have not changed about it. So from that point of view, I would say yes. But interestingly, like when I entered the workforce as an 18-year-old, and I had as a sidebar, I enrolled in university. I went to a public school in Western Sydney, and academic achievement wasn't something that happened very often there. And I had to get in the top 4% in New South Wales to get into this journalism course. And I went for the first 3 days, and at the same time I was applying for newspaper cadetships. And I was sitting in the lecture theatre, and I know I didn't give much time, but I was just like, my God, 3 years of this, and I just couldn't see any relevance. I just wanted to get my teeth in and start reporting and do this stuff. And yeah, thankfully the editor of the local newspaper, independent newspaper, called me up, and he asked me if I was 18. I'm like, well, what does that have to do with anything? And he said, oh, because we go to the pub every lunchtime and we meet up with the other journalists from the other papers and we talk shop and play pool. Okay. And then I got the job because But I digress. But the job itself, the technology around the job and the pressures have definitely changed. And at that point, it was very competitive, very, very competitive, trying to get into journalism. And that was part of my decision to put the degree on hold and do the job first and get the work experience, because I had a friend who continued on and finished that course and then ended up working in a department store for years because she couldn't get a journalism job. And that I could see that writing on the wall then. I was like, I've got a chance to get a job. And it was, yeah, so competitive. And the process of getting into the ABC was also really tough. I went for cadetships 3 years in a row and didn't even get to, you know, pass the first hurdle. And ultimately moved from Sydney to Alice Springs to get my job with the ABC. And had a 50% pay cut in order to do that, and had done a master's degree and had done 300 hours of work experience for the 7:30 report and ABC Illawarra in the year that I was doing my master's degree. That's what it took for me to get into the ABC. It was highly, highly competitive. Whereas I'm hearing now, like regional jobs up here in far north Queensland are really becoming difficult to fill, because I think the young ones coming through are seeing how hard it is now. And it is, I think it is harder than when I started, because it is the 24-hour news cycle, and you are expected to file several times a day and be across social media, and in some places film and photograph for your own stories, and now I think even edit. So yeah, the demands are really high, and the pay really hasn't matched that over the years. So yeah, long-winded. Yes, I would still encourage people to pursue journalism as a career. It's an enormous privilege, and you just get access to a whole bunch of things that the average person doesn't, in terms of, you know, insights into people and knowledge and experiences and events in history. But yes, it is a lot tougher than it was, I think, in terms of the demands of the job, which aren't matched by the pay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you do get that. It's the non-pay payoffs that led people like you into journalism, me into the police. And it's that insight into the human condition. Because really, when you're getting an insight into the human condition, of course, ultimately you're getting an insight into yourself and to whom you are. And as a young person, you know, be you an 18-year-old journalist drinking beer with the boys down at the pub, or a 19-year-old driving around in a Commodore with a mate in a baton, like you're kind of like, well, who am I really? Like, you know, and what am I going to be like when I'm tested? And that's you know, that's gold. Like that's why, like you, I stayed in too long, but I don't regret joining because I found those things out about myself. Like you wouldn't have done that otherwise. You know, you just wouldn't have got that insight. Like, no disrespect to other professions, but it's, you know, unless you're in something like that where you're being tried and tested, like, you're not going to find that out as an accountant. You know, you just not. Again, no disrespect to accountancy; it's an important job, but you know, horses for courses. Well, that's reassuring. That is a reassuring thing, I must say. That you do, even after all that trial and tribulation, recommend it. If I can make an observation, like I think half the reason these positions can't be filled is not just the pay, and that obviously does need to be looked at. But like, I mean, pretty much anyone now can get into storytelling and journalism. Like you could have a peanut from North Queensland wearing a bad shirt with a Zoom app. I'm just picking an example entirely at random, you know, and tell stories. But one of the other things I'd like to ask you, how do you, like when you've got a 10 or 15 second grab or whatever it is, how do you get a complicated thing like that, getting both the forensic facts and the narrative, the experience of it? Like, how did you do that? That's such a challenging job.
It is. And obviously the little bit that you're hearing as a grab is part of a much larger interview. So you are getting context around a story from a person when you're interviewing them. But then, yeah, you do have to put your lens across it and not inject your own feelings or opinions. And just, yeah, I don't know. It is a skill, just drilling down to the nuts and bolts of what's the main point of this story. And I think this is where a lot of disconnect happens between the media and the people speaking to the media, and where the fear and apprehension comes from. Because quite often I hear in my media training that, oh, you know, I've got a distrust of the media because I was misquoted. And often when I review the story and review the interview, they're not misquoted. They might have been taken out of context, but largely drilling down to the disconnect is of that's not the story. That's not the version of the story that you wanted.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So it is about the journalists will, you know, they want people to be listening, and it depends a fair bit on the media outlet as well as to how much the drama is amped up in things. But essentially, journalists are going to be looking for the most exciting thing, the newest thing, or the most dramatic thing. So it's really up to us when we do interviews to be mindful of that. And if there's certain facts that we want to deliver and a certain message that we want to deliver, then stick to that. Don't let it wander in 6 different directions and then criticize the journalists because you didn't get the story or the version of the story that you wanted.
That's exactly right. There's always a point with anything. I was discussing this, well, I've discussing it once. I've had this discussion many times with lawyers, and disproportionately actually defense lawyers, although the DPP are great, you know, every now and then they'll come in and go, hey guys, you know, you're taking a statement. But there's always when we're talking about a forensic description of something, and they're big on this with the police, it's like forensic description, okay, who, what, when, where, why, just the facts. But it's like, okay, yes, but at what level? So someone being punched in the face, you're not going to describe it at the molecular level, that these molecules did this or these cells broke into this. And, you know, describing that, it's true, and it goes to validate whatever it is that, you know, that's evidence, that's validatory evidence. But you're kind of missing the point. You know, you really do have to look at a story at a certain level to look for a point before you can tell the story. And people understand that the point comes, that the facts start to shine when you consider the point. If you want to talk about like how you figure out a point and how that influenced your journalism and how you teach people and how you were training and mentoring people and how it could help if someone wants to get a story out to the media.
Going back to us as individuals and our concept of ourself and our Western society, something that I talk about is what does it mean to me? And that's kind of the approach that I come from as a journalist, and also teaching media training is too often we get caught up in the fact that, you know, we've got this great story to tell, but if it's not if there's not something new, if it's not something revealing, or there's some new data, or there's what I call a hook or a call to action, then, you know, what is the point of doing that story? And when you're, and this applies to presenting as well, if you don't think about the audience, then what are you there for? You know, you're entertaining yourself. So it's about, I get people to think about, well, what is in it for them? Now, someone listening to a story on the radio, they're going to be listening for, well, what the hell does it mean for me? So as a journalist, you're that conduit between a piece of information and the audience, and you're trying to, I guess, distill from that information what is likely to be most impactful for the person who's consuming that story. And often that's something that people don't think about when they're wanting to get their story in the medium. And like, well, what's different? What's different about you? What's different about this? What is the point? What is the reason that people, whether they're reading a newspaper article, listening to it on the radio, consuming it on social media, what is going to make them sit up and go, oh, I want to know more about this? And it's generally because the answer is generally, what does it mean to me? What impact is this going to have? Why should I care? And I think people don't often put that lens over there. So yeah, as a journalist, you're really trying to get through all the stuff and the fluff and the rhetoric, and go, well, what's a useful piece of information out of all of this?
Yep.
To most of the people who are wanting to consume this.
Any words of wisdom, anything you'd want to impart on? And please don't be modest, because, you know, it's nice that, you know, what you've done is pretty cool.
Yeah, so the business that you showed before is now part of emotion video training and production, and part of the joy of that is actually putting, people already have in their hands what they need to tell stories, and we see it obviously in social media. So everyone's got one of these days. So it's a great joy to have taken those journalism skills and my love of mentoring. I've mentored a lot of journalists who are now ABC foreign correspondents and in politics and whatnot, and you know, I get a real thrill about that. Yeah, what I love is that my journalism is having another life through training people how to tell their own stories, not just through media training, but actually using their phones to create videos to get messages out there, whether it be promoting a business or sharing stories or whatever it might be. So it's an incredible time to be around, because as you said before, everyone has it in their hands to be able to tell stories, and it's nice to inject a little bit of professionalism into that evolution with the journalism skills and the technical skills of being able to film and edit videos. So I guess to anyone who's been here for the entire journey and was listening to me talk about not thinking about a future for myself, the take home really is you can create a life that you want. We don't have to be stuck with a choice that we perhaps made for ourselves earlier or somebody else made for us. I know a lot of people get pressure from family to go a certain way with their career. I didn't. In fact, my parents were quite alarmed when I didn't continue with university straight out of school and went to work for $200 a week on my local newspaper. But they've ultimately been convinced of the journey. So yeah, just don't think that it's what you're doing now is the end game for you. You have to be brave, and yeah, you have to evolve. But if something is really lighting you up, really tap into that. And one of the real joys that I have seen moving from being a journalist to a business owner is I used to avoid people. Like, as a journalist, you're talking to people on the phone all day, every day, and some of those people you'd rather, you know, not have half an hour conversations with, because you're thinking about the next deadline and So you kind of get to a point, I don't know if others are the same, but apart from media drinks with your colleagues who can empathize about the incredibly long week they've just had, you tend to avoid meeting new people and networking, as they call it. But as a business owner, that's how you get your name out there and how you get business. And it's one of the things that I've enjoyed most transitioning from one to the other is I'm a social person. I love people and I love hearing people's stories. And I've actually embraced that whole idea of getting out into the community and going to lots of events and meeting new people and getting out of my comfort zone and having great conversations as part of my business journey. So yeah, we can reinvent ourselves, and we can have another life and another career, and don't stay where you are. I've got this tattoo on my arm, which I got in 2018 before I went to Nepal for the second time. And to me, it represents if you change nothing, nothing will change. And it's designed for me to look at it as a lot of people don't even see it. It's very much a message for me that's imprinted on my body. I carried it around on a piece of paper for a year before I made the decision to commit to it, but it was the right message for me. And I remind myself that if you change nothing, nothing will change. So if you're feeling stuck, just change. It can just be changing one little thing, having a conversation with somebody, or opening yourself up to the idea that you could do something different as a job, and be kind to yourself. I know myself, and I still have this. I put myself under enormous pressure. I'm a huge perfectionist, and I have extremely high standards of myself and those I'm working with. So sometimes that can be a bit exhausting for myself and for others. And every now and then I've got to stop and go, actually give yourself a bit of a break. You're doing pretty well. If you rewind the clock a few years ago to now, you're doing okay. So sometimes I think we're just way too hard on ourselves, and we forget that perspective. We've got this whole life, and it goes through peaks and troughs, and people come in and out of it, and so do jobs, and that's okay. So these days I'm motivated by happiness and health and well-being more than anything else, and everything else comes later. As long as I can keep a roof over my head and I've got enough money that I can be charitable to others, I'm happy.
An incredibly intimate interview, magnificently intimate, which is what I've called this interview. Look, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for staying with us. Please like, please share, please tell your friends. Got some great interviews lined up. And of course, if anyone is out there who has some more suggestions for interviews, please don't hesitate to contact me through Facebook.